Welcome to Deep in the Woods, where we take one word and we take one walk and we see the connections it makes in our lives. This episode will be a little different. This is the first time I'm going to try to test and film this as a video podcast as well. So, this is somewhat of an experiment to see how that goes. But if this is your first time listening to the podcast, the essential way this works is we pick one word and we find a place to walk and we take a deep dive into it. Just the same way a trail takes you deep into the woods, a word also can take us to a deeper place within ourselves. So for today, I have picked the word time. Um, this has been in my mind lately, doing some reading on it, but I'm going to go into more detail of why that word was important and stuck out. But before I do that, I want to talk about the place. Where am I walking at? This is Marietta City in Georgia. This is their Confederate cemetery. I'll talk more about why I chose this place as I get through the word time. But you can see as I walk around, if you're watching the video, that I'm going through a very large cemetery. So let's jump into the word itself and explain why I chose the word time. And I'm going to start this by talking about a dream I had recently. So I woke up and I probably told way too many people about this dreams. I realize most people don't really care what people's dreams are, but I find dreams to be intriguing. My wife does not always want to hear when I wake up every detail of my dreams and why I think them to be significant. But I personally find dreams to be like a magic. Like, we get to watch some kind of movie at night when we go to sleep. So I find them to be pretty intriguing. Well, I happened to have a dream a couple weeks ago that was myself. I was actually walking in the woods and I came across my own self in the past. So it was almost like you think of, this wasn't like a childhood me, but it was just me from the past. And then a little further, we come across my future self. And my future self, we go through, and I don't even remember the details of what we talked about. That really wasn't what stood out. But when I go to leave, I asked my future self, I said, don't you remember this conversation? If you're from the future, you would have to have done this already, right? And there was someone with my future self that said, in the future, he doesn't remember his past. And that stuck with me. It took me a little bit to kind of hash through that. I think dreams sometimes give us something to play around with in our mind. And this dream particularly did. So after a while and, reading about the concepts of time, and for a long time, I've been thinking about, past and present and future, and how many people say you can only live in the present and our futures and our past really don't exist. And, the whole cliche of living in the moment, those things have always kind of eluded me in terms of how I could apply that or what the significance of it. But, so after thinking about it more, and I've been reading Alan Watts recently about some of his concepts of time, it kind of stood out to me as a kind of a message for me to think that time really doesn't exist in the present. And like we have built the constructs of what past is and what the future is, right? And in one of the books I've been reading, it compares it to music. So for example, if we look at a single note within music, let's say we strike a C note on a piano, and I tap that, and someone asks to describe that note. They often will describe it in relation to other notes. They'll say it's higher or lower, it's higher than B, lower than D, it's an octave higher than another C. And so it's all built on relativity. Like these things are relative to something else. And so time is also the same thing, that we can only describe the current moment often based off of the prior and after effects of things, right? So I can only say this happened before or after this moment. And honestly, it's really cool to think about, like, the things that are occurring in the present time, right? So we can talk about the present time as my present time versus yours. And we can even say that right now, if you're listening to this, it's not on the same time plane as when I recorded it. So, for example, my current self, when you're listening to this, is probably somewhere completely different, doing something. Maybe I'm working, maybe I'm hiking somewhere, or maybe I'm spending time with my kids, but I'm not doing the thing that you're listening to right now. However, that did occur. So time has all of these elements that we use to describe it, but they're really all in relation to other things. And we build these concepts in our head to essentially help us to measure time, to be able to talk about it in a concept. So what does that mean? Like, how do you deal with that? Right. Because aren't we supposed to all just be living in the moment? Well, I would do want to stop for a second and point out where I'm standing. There's a local story here. I'm going to talk about stories in a minute about Mary Fagan. And if this camera works well, I can say right over here, you can see this sign, which is Mary Fagan. And you can see that in 1913, she was murdered at the age of 13. And there was a trial and a conviction of a guy named Leo Frank. If I get a chance, I'd like to talk a little more about that story because he was abducted from prison and lynched, as it says here. And in 1986, he was issued a pardon. There's a place down the street where they actually lynched him at. So again, that's a story about a place and time. That's our history. And I think those things are important because history is important. However, why is it that so many people say that we should live in the present because the past doesn't exist or the future we can't control? Those are all the things we often hear. And one other element to all this is that people will say that the present is eternal, right? So what does all that mean? It's all these big, vague concepts that people have discussed, but when you start to dig through it, it's hard to really find like real ways of dealing with that, right? So I started recently thinking about what that means in that present moment. Because a lot of people will say, those are times to meditate, to kind of escape or really think about and, concepts when you can really, let's say you stop in a present moment, right? And you are able to be aware that you are there. And what is that goal? What does that look like for you? What do you get out of that, right? And I think what it is that we often have this ability to step back and observe a moment and notice it without having to analyze it by just seeing it for what it is. A good example is when you experience an emotion, right? Our emotions are biological or something we experience, right? And in an emotion, it's something that you can actually stop for a moment, pull yourself back from, and not remove it. I'm not saying it makes the emotion go away, but you can say, I am in a person experiencing emotion right now. I can be aware that that is occurring, and you can attend to it in a different way than you can if you aren't aware of that. So I can say this is temporary. I'm angry. I'm mad about this situation, but it's a temporary emotion that my body is going through based on an experience that has occurred, right? So that occurs in a present moment, right? Often we will think of things in terms of what's happening in the future, right? That's where a lot of anxieties come from. So we will go through and discuss what's happening we'll think in our brain what's going to occur, right? So we might say to ourselves, I have this stressful event coming up. Let's say it is a job interview, or it's, I have this due date that I have to get these things completed by. And I think anxiety and thinking about those things is it's a planning process. It helps us to get through life. But oftentimes we kind of dwell in this current moment in a time that doesn't yet exist. So that's the other part of this, is that we can dwell on our past to be able to determine what it is that we're worried about the past because we've measured it based on experiences we have. And then we're worried about the future based on an experience that's not yet occurred. I don't think we as humans have the ability to remove those pieces, and I think they each have their own purpose. Here's where I think things can change in regards to time. Like, what can you do in a present moment that can be helpful to be, in your next step. And, you hear a lot of Eastern writers talk about these concepts, but here's the part that stood out to me after reading a lot of these things. It's how you focus your attention in that moment determines the story that you will be able to hold on to from this point forward, which is then are going to build the constructs and concepts of how you think and how you act. And so, for example, if in this exact moment, I decided to put my attention on, for example, there's people walking around, and my thoughts often go to what they're thinking about me walking around a cemetery talking to myself, right? So there's a story I've played into my head and I've built. It's a concept, a construct. I've built this story that people are going to think of me a certain way based on their judgments. So I'm taking their perceived judgment, placing it on me. Get to hear the train behind me. I get to take their perceived judgments, place them on me and say, this is what they think here. Therefore, here's how I will act in this moment. And I get to create a story based on what I do and what I think. So long story short, I'm going to give this train just a second to go by because you get to experience the reality of living in a city here. I got a train and I got an ambulance or a police car coming through. So you get all the sounds. So the long and short of what I was coming to with that is that we make decisions based on the stories and constructs that we have in our mind. And each moment we get to make a decision about which of those things we continue to hold on to. And these are all stories. That's the part that I want to make you aware of. And I also am trying myself to think of is that each present moment we get to determine where we draw our attention to, and we get to determine what parts of the stories we continue to carry forward, right? So there's your ambulance. Maybe I can turn it where you can see it go by. The biggest thing here is the past is gone. It no longer exists, but the stories and constructs still stay, right? But what we don't realize is we can change those stories instantaneously. We don't have to hold on to them. We don't have to decide that these stories are the truth. We've decided that they're the truth based on our experiences, but that doesn't mean that they're real. We determine what is real, and that's why the present moment is so powerful, because right now I have the option to be able to say, I'm not really concerned about what those people think. I can walk around holding a camera and a microphone and not let that determine what I think of what I'm doing, right? I can continue forward and not let it affect the way that I'm having this conversation. I'm very aware that I am perceived as strange and odd walking through a cemetery with a camera in my hand, but I don't have to let that prior self-judgment control the way that I think about things, right? And that's one simple example, but it applies to everything, right? So when we go through our day, we make thousands and thousands of decisions based on stories that we've already told ourselves. And we can instantaneously, in a moment, completely alter the way we perceive the past, the way we perceive the future. Time has this, is an illusion. It's this thing that we've built to make us think that we have to act a certain way based on prior and future decisions or images or creations that we have built, right? Because we now think that the future is going to go a certain way. And that brings me to why am I here walking around a cemetery, right? Each of these people, and you can see there's thousands and thousands. I'm only in a small portion of the cemetery right now. There's thousands of people who lived, and during their time, while they were here, they had eternal moments in the present where each of them got to make decisions that were based off of their past and their expectations of the future. And that's where it gets difficult. Like, we have this expectation that death is something that will happen while I sleep when I'm in my 80s or 90s. and that's this thing that's going to occur. But death is a natural process that can happen to anyone at any time. And we see situations where people die at a younger age, and we're like, "Wow, that's unfortunate. That's very sad. They didn't get to experience their full life." And many times we don't fully experience our full lives, even when as we get older, because we're always having this expectation that this future story will eventually occur that will get me to this place where I've been presently happy or presently at a place that I'm content. And those again are stories we have built that says I have to do these things to get to this point where I am now I did it. I've made success. I've checked the boxes. I did all those things. I'm done the bucket list, which we all know that's not going to happen. I have a huge book list, right? It's a list that goes on forever. And I know at some point that list, I'm not going to read all of those books. I'm going to die at some point, and those books are not going to be all read. I mean, it's kind of sad to me that I won't get to all of them, but I know that's just the reality of it. There's a point where I'm going to say bye to my children for the last time. There's a point where I will hear a song and I'll never hear it again, right? And every moment that exists, I have to experience it knowing that this could be the final moment. The present has to be eternal. It has to be something that exists now that I can say, here's the story I want to experience at this moment, not based off of the fear of the future or the expectations of it, not based on the stories that I created in the past that says this is how life is. I have to experience saying, this is the moment that I have. What do I want to do with this? And how do I want my story to exist right now? And so as I look around at all of these gravestones and I think about the people who are here that they were experiencing life, their time is finished, right? Their time on this earth is finished. You know, they no longer get to experience the all of the sensations, all of the stories. They don't get to make those present decisions about how their life will go because it's done. And we still have the opportunity. If you're listening to this, you still have a present moment that's eternal, that you can recreate your story in any way you want it to be. So why did I start this off with, why did I introduce this episode solo and want to talk about this? As this next year goes forward, as this next season goes forward, each episode is going to have a link to that story, right? So we'll get like a slice. You'll get to experience a slice of a conversation where I get to walk with someone and talk to them about their story. And I think it's important that we understand every one of us has their own unique story that we can exchange and talk about. But it's not, we all are kind of like in this mush connection of a story that exists with all humanity. And I think the part, there's a metaphor that I've heard recently says there is a rock on a beach where there is a wave hitting it, right? And that's happening right now. There's a wave that's hitting that rock somewhere. Let's say it's the Pacific Northwest up in Washington. There's this rock right now. You can put it in your mind, and that wave is crashing onto it right now, right? And we can think of it as a single wave that is crashing onto a rock, or we can think of it as the entire ocean, all of the water on the planet interceding onto this one spot. And that's why I want to bring this up, is that as we talk about all these different stories, your story, all the ones that I'll present, my own, we're all going to look at it as if we were one single wave, right? We can even say, oh, it was a wave that crashed on it a long time ago, or it's a wave that will crash on this rock in 2 weeks, right? We can see it through that perception of time, or we can say that we are all stories in this huge ocean that is crashing on this planet at the same time right now, right? And we are all getting to experience it. Each of us have an important story to play, but we all are having a story that's making an impact across every area based on the present decisions that we make. And those are dictated by the stories that we choose to tell ourselves, right? So what do you take away from this? What do I take away from all of this? Like I said, I've struggled with this concept of time, this concept that the present is now, that we have to live it right now, live in the moment. I work with kids who have disabilities. I even think this sometimes when I think of how especially young children in general, that you see how they interact with the world. They seem to always be in the present moment. Sometimes that's it, like the crying and the anger part of it. They don't understand how to react to things because they don't see the world often as it is in 10 minutes, this thing will be better. They see it right now. How do I feel at this moment? Right. And as an adult looking back, you almost feel like that's a stressful experience, right? We like the fact that we can see and predict the future and make decisions about it, or we like that we understand how the world is existing based on the past. However, I know we can't always live that way. The moments you can, this is what I've recently learned. The moments that you can stop and look at the present moment and be aware that you were living in the eternal present space. Stop for a little bit and just notice. Notice that this is where you are. Notice that the decisions from the past and the expectations from the future are dictating often each of your decisions. And just let it sit for a minute and know that those moments in the past and future have no power over now. So that's where I'm going to end at. Just remembering that there is this ability, even how abstract that sounds, that the present is eternal and that we should live in that moment. I know we can't always, but just having those moments where you can actually stop for a moment, take a step back, observe your thoughts, observe what's happening, and let go of some of those stories that you no longer want. You don't have to continue to hold on to them, and let go of the fact that the future is something that you can have assured expectations and control over. We don't. But you don't have any control over what's happening in 5 minutes or what's happening in 5 years. So as we go through this next season, I'm going to let this permeate through all of these conversations, that time and our stories are important. It's important to share them. And it's important to understand how we hold on to these stories and how they impact our decisions. Thank you for walking with me through the Marietta Confederate Cemetery. I'm hoping this video turns out to where you can see the experience of walking and getting deep into a word like time. And if you like listening to something like this, check it out on Instagram, where I'll be posting different videos. I'm doing some shorter clips now coming up about words. The concept of going on one walk and going deep into one word is something that I really enjoy, and I hope you enjoy it too. So if you do, follow me, follow the podcast and listen. And I hope you enjoyed this conversation. So I'll see you next time. Thank you.